Hello and welcome to the Magical Learning Podcast. Today I've got a special guest and I'm going to get Lawrence to introduce himself in a second. Lawrence Lam has recently written a book called The Founder Effect. And for those who've known me for a while, they know that I often work with big global family businesses. And what I love about them is how they think not just short-term, medium, long-term, they think generationally. And what I love about Lawrence's book, it's about the 3 pillars of success in founder-led companies and how we can think about this in organisations across the world. So super excited to have Lawrence come on the podcast today. And Lawrence, I might hand it over to you to just share a little bit of your background and also why you wrote this book.
Thanks, Danette. It's a pleasure to be here. So my name's Lawrence Lam. I'm a fund manager. I run my own investment fund, Lumenary Investment Management. As part of my career, I've spent 2 decades looking at a myriad of different types of companies. I've had roles as a federal regulator, working for APRA, which is interesting because you're looking at companies from a different lens as almost government versus private businesses. I then had a role in consulting where for one of the big 4 accounting firms where I advised corporates, big, small, private, publicly listed, and I got to see a huge gamut of companies. In that time, I started seeing companies that were highly successful, but also quite under the radar, not very well recognized, especially in the media. And so as my career progressed, I started noticing more and more of these because I started seeing they behave very differently to most companies, and they think very differently, which showed up in their financial statements. It showed up in the way they presented themselves to customers and their approach. And they're quite softly spoken about it. If they're a person, they'd be very modest. And then I moved into investment banking, which was more on a global level, looking at financial structuring, financial engineering, and being able to see things from a transactional point of view. Over that time, it just came to me that there's this special group of companies that aren't overly discussed. And so the idea for the book came about because I've studied these companies over the course of my 2 decades, looking at different types of companies. And I think that they're onto something that is very different, but hugely successful. So I wanted to shine a spotlight on these types of businesses through my book. Now, what I've learned from them is something that can be applied to any type of company, not just the founder-led company. But founders have a unique edge because they're able to have the flexibility to problem solve through their organizations, but they also have the autonomy to be able to make bold decisions, as we'll see later on, why that's so important. So by taking the concepts of success in these companies, the book talks about a 3-pillar framework that can apply to any type of organization.
And, with the economy going a bit haywire, not just domestically, but globally, I would suggest that your book is really for anyone who's thinking of starting a business, as well as those that are in businesses at the moment that really want to try and look at it differently and do it in a much more, what I would think of as sustainable way. So I'm loving reading your book because it just has some really smart strategies that are really easy to understand. So super excited. So let's start with my first question, which is, what traits should we be looking for when we're creating a great management team? If we want a great company, what are we looking for in the management team?
Well, that's the very question that the book answers. It's what makes exceptional management teams. And it really boils down to 3 things. The 3 things that we should look for are the ability to make bold decisions. Can management teams make the tough calls when necessary? And tough being unpopular with a lot of other people, unpopular potentially with customers, potentially with staff in the short term, but actually is the right thing to do in the long term. So can they make those difficult, bold decisions? Are they motivated for the right reasons? That's the second thing. And ever more important in this world where we see people changing jobs, employment being so portable these days, that it's hard to retain people and keep them motivated. So we want to see management teams that are motivated and incentivized to achieve things for the owners, for customers over the long term. And then the third thing is, do they have influence? Can the management team influence customers, the market in general? Can they influence media? Can they influence their own staff to be able to distill the philosophy which they want to operate with? And those 3 key ingredients are crucial to assessing how successful a management team will be in shaping a business over decades.
And what I love about your book is that while they sound like things that are quite difficult to actually measure, you've got formulas, etc., that help us actually break down what we're looking for. So it's really, what I love is that it's very practical.
This is a topic that's been on my mind as an investor and going through my career. It's always, how do you judge people, how people will perform? And it's such a subjective topic. And so I've written the book in a way that allows for an objective measurement tool for something that's inherently quite qualitative.
And that I love. All right, next question is, what helps them to make great, bold decisions? Because that's one of those pillars. And a lot of people, because I do a lot around the brain science, when times are hard, brain shuts down neural pathways and they tend to make very safe, conservative decisions. But often we see where companies really continue to be sustainable over the long term, it's those bold decisions. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, making the bold decision, as I mentioned, is very hard. There's several aspects to that. It firstly requires the correct decision-making setup, I would say. Your organization, your management team needs to be set up in a way that it can actually make bold decisions. One example is, and there are many group cognitive biases that stop us from making good decisions, by the way. So have we ever, or I have certainly sat in boards where you sit around a table with a large group of people, someone has a really great suggestion as to doing something that is putting your neck out, so to speak, right? And saying, okay, I think we should head in this direction. It's a positive, well thought out sort of move. But then everyone says yes, yes, yes around the table. But then someone says, I just have this concern around something to do with some conflict, or it just won't sit well with some risk averse. And you can see how that gradually just infiltrates the rest of the group, because there's this group mentality of safety, right? So I don't want to be the one that says something or suggests something that then causes us to go backwards. Yeah. And so it becomes very risk averse, and you see one by one, the idea gets shut down, even though it's a very valid and great idea. And that's what happens in group dynamics, where you're overtaken by cognitive biases. So firstly, you have to be set up in a way to overcome those. And in the book, I outline what are the things you can look for that can tell you a clue as to, okay, this organization is too risk averse, is too bureaucratic, versus ones that aren't. The second thing is, I would say, bold decisions sounds very, very risky, but actually it isn't. So it's more about taking asymmetric risks. I'll give you an example. When I interviewed Jack Gantz, who is the founder of Chemist Warehouse, for the book, he told me a story of how he first got started with Latan and Lespex. I don't know if many people know that he's actually the man behind those brands before Chemist Warehouse. In those days, he wanted to have a way of getting his brand out into the broader market, but he didn't want to take the risk of a big marketing spend in order to do that. So what he did was he approached some TV channels back in the day and said to them, hey, I'll do a deal with you. If you run my ad and it becomes successful and generates sales, I'll actually give you a portion of whatever sales I generate. And so for him, that was a way of taking a risk that was asymmetric. It was more upside than downside. And that's one way of that I've seen a lot of founders can make these big decisions, but actually the gradual, well-considered asymmetric risks they're taking.
Yeah. What a great example. I didn't know that about the Latan and the specs, so that's interesting. So let's now talk about, because three concepts you talk in the book about are judgment, alignment, and influence, particularly in a rapidly changing world. So tell us a little bit more about the importance of judgment, alignment, and influence.
Yeah, judgment is about being able to make right decisions. It's also about looking at ways to overcome bad decisions. And if you look at how organizations, how I mentioned before with cognitive biases, how are they set up to be able to overcome the bad decisions first before they can even make good judgments. It's ever so more important in this day and age where we see a rapidly changing environment where if you're just thinking short term, you're always playing catch up to what's going to happen next. You need to be able to make judgment calls that stand the test of time over many decades. With alignment, that's about motivation. Are management teams motivated for the right reasons? And I mentioned that in this era where information is quite widely available, what drives success isn't so much the availability of information, it's how you access that information and how people remained true to your organization and want to work for you, because we've seen many companies come unstuck because of the way they operate, and people don't agree. Society doesn't agree with how they operate. So how do you build that motivation, that alignment with people in this day and age where everyone knows everything about everyone? And the third part of it is influence. With the availability of information, with media being so broadly available, we see the key to success being how management teams can relay that message internally with their staff so that they can scale and replicate that philosophy externally to the market. Because no one person can sell every single product to every single person. It really needs that team rowing in the same direction.
Great answer. And that sort of segues into my next question, which is very well done. Tell us more about how you design scalable company structures that actually magnify the productivity as they grow, so they become what I would call stronger as they grow.
This is a question of organizational design.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, what you want is an organization that amplifies people. The more people you add to the business, the more you amplify and not suffocate. And this is an interesting fact that I discovered as part of my research for the book is, did you know that when cities expand, cities grow with more people, they become more productive. So that on a per capita basis, there actually is greater economic output per person. And that's why people these days are gravitating towards cities and urbanizing as a trend. The issue is that with companies, the opposite happens. As the company gets larger, productivity decreases. And we only need to look at the largest companies here in Australia to see that the more people you add, the larger the pyramid gets, the more levels you have, and the further you are away from the customer. And what happens is the same cycle resets itself when you do a big restructure, and then you start again. What I've seen in organizations that do it really well is they have a way of organizing the structure of the personnel so that it becomes delegated autonomy. So it's like a hub and spoke model rather than a pyramid model. And the reason that is so successful is that as a way of operating, we can only deal with so many people. And if we have a big pyramid structure, what that implies is that we have potentially thousands and thousands of people underneath us if you're up at the executive level. And there's no possible way that you can manage all those people or be accountable for them. It's impossible. So if you look at companies like, there's a Italian IT consulting company called Reply Spa. They do it very interestingly. They separate their company into sub-companies. So they literally have they call it a shopping center of companies, about 100 or plus or so. And each company is much smaller than the large company. So they break themselves up into different service lines and by country as well. On a much larger scale, if you look at a company like LVMH, so Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy, they have the world's largest luxury brands, and each luxury brand operates almost independently. And that's how they've achieved their success, by reorganizing themselves to allow people to retain that entrepreneurial spirit without being suffocated by a massive pyramid bureaucracy structure.
Love that insight. And, for a lot of organizations, they think we'll just get bigger. But as you said, that tends to make us less productive. I recently heard of a family business that had over 1,000 sub-companies in it to allow for that entrepreneurial spirit in the different generations. So it obviously works when we think about that design. So I love that.
Yeah, it definitely is a very effective way of organizing a business. The caveat I'd say is that you'd have to have very clear decision-making delegations, because sometimes we see this done, but then not being implemented well can also cause its own issues. In this case, if you ask people on executive management teams that have delegations, it needs to be simple, and you need to be able to know it off the top of your head without having to refer to a document. They said, okay, there was some delegation done a while ago, but it was only for these decisions and not these. It needs to be very simple.
Yeah, I love that. I love that because it works with the brain as well. And under pressure, simple helps us implement really well. So lots of changes. So I love that. And just before we finish, Lawrence, I'm really curious because I've written a book. I've got a second one with the editor at the moment, but I'm really interested in how you went about writing the book, because you had so much great information, great case studies. So I'd love if you wouldn't mind sharing with our listeners and viewers, what was your process?
Yeah, the process of the book took about 2 years end to end. And luckily I had a lot of that research already written down. When I do my research papers for companies that I invest in and I'm looking at different things, I often take notes. So I had plenty of notes to go off, plenty of experience traveling and interviewing founders. And it was just a matter of having the time to put it all together. So I had a baby last December and I also had a publishing deal. So I knew that I had to work quick. And oftentimes it was after dinner to get the words out into a book form. It was hugely challenging. For those that are interested in authorship, that's a whole nother topic, and we can talk about that next time. But I thoroughly enjoyed being able to summarize all that knowledge into written form, albeit very late hours. The secret for me, earplugs, really. Just put on the earplugs and just concentrate.
That's brilliant. So Lawrence, we're just about at the end of our interview for today. Doesn't mean we're not going to have you back, by the way, just for today. So is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners and also our viewers around the topic and your book? And I'll just hold your book up so those on YouTube can see the founder effect beautifully.
Yeah, I'm very proud of the book. It's a culmination of a lot of research and knowledge that I've had over the years. And it's a celebration of companies that don't often seek the limelight. So if you're interested in those under the radar type of approaches, types of businesses that are arguably just as successful, if not more, if you measure over a long period of time, then this is the book for you. If you're interested in keeping in touch, I've got a website, lawrencelam.org, and where I publish a quarterly newsletter on interesting founder-led companies I discover. And for those that are interested in how it actually works in practice as an investor, feel free to visit my investment firm website, lumenaryinvest.com.
We'll make sure that we include all those links with the YouTube video and also the podcast as well. So Lawrence, what a fabulous book, and really glad that you've written this, because for me, this is something that I've wanted organisations to look at for a long time. So I love that you've written this. Can I say thank you very much? And to all our listeners and viewers, have a magical week.